BMW iX3 mid-sized EV crossover marks a new phase of electric vehicle development from the Munich maker. The brand's fifth-generation electrified tech delivers a very competitive 285-mile range, and it's all been built into the X3 floor plan using rear-wheel drive and a single-motor format in such a way as to minimise the usual EV handling downsides of extra bulk and weight. As a result, here's an electric car that someone used to a combustion model might be able to adapt to remarkably easily.
How do you like your EVs? Unusual and futuristic with bespoke design, or visually identical to combustion models? Well, it's rare in the upper mid-sized luxury part of the crossover EV segment to find a brand pursuing the latter approach, but that's what we've got here with BMW's very familiar looking iX3. The underpinnings of this, the Bavarian maker's second ever full EV, are familiar too. Like its EV showroom stablemate, the i4, it runs on basically the same CLAR-based structure used for all of BMW's mainstream mid-sized combustion models. That's in contrast to the design approach taken with the company's largest EV, the iX, which gets the kind of bespoke electric vehicle platform that most other makers competing in this iX3 model's segment reckon that you have to have. When it comes to mid-sized models, BMW disagrees, and the design beneath the familiar panelwork here is disarmingly straightforward. Simplistically, all we've really got in this case is a regular X3 without its front drive shafts and with a battery pack inserted into the floor. But of course, there's much more to the iX3 than that, as we'll be finding out in this test. For BMW, this model's key significance is twofold. Now, first, its arrival makes the brand's familiar X3 mid-sized SUV the first of the Munich maker's models to be offered with a choice of combustion, plug-in or full EV power options. The second significant fact here is that this is the first of the company's cars to be produced in China for export to all world markets. Production takes place at a joint venture factory at Shenyang in Liaoning, which is operated jointly by BMW and the Chinese manufacturer Brilliance. This model was announced in 2020 here, which was well after it had gone on sale in China, and British customers had to wait even longer for the first cars to reach UK dealers. That didn't happen until well into 2021, by which time BMW had announced a facelift for the entire X3 range, and that included a few tweaks for this all-electric version. As far as genre is concerned, this iX3 model's positioning is either unique or slightly awkward, depending on your perspective. In terms of both price and size, it sits just above mid-sized crossover EVs like Volkswagen's ID.4 and the Ford Mustang Mach-E, but just below larger luxury EV models like the Jaguar I-Pace and the Mercedes EQC. Still, it could be that this is exactly the kind of EV crossover positioning that you're looking for. If so, you'll need the industry's most comprehensive video review, Car and Driving's road test, to guide you through what's on offer here. Your first impressions that this looks pretty much like any other BMW X3 disappear pretty quickly once you get behind the wheel. The power button has been brightly coloured blue to remind you of your eco-centeredness, and once you press it, the car plays a tune and the instrument cluster lights up to tell you that you're ready to go. The gauges are a little different from normal too. The fuel readout is replaced by a battery indicator, and the usual rev counter is supplanted by a power meter that tells you how much energy you're using at any given time. Get familiar with that and you're ready to go. Now, this isn't one of those EVs that rather pointlessly hurls itself away from rest like a scalded cat. BMW has instead programmed the iX3 to always set itself off in the most relaxed of the three driving modes that it offers, Eco Pro. That's a setting where throttle response and also the car's rather weird spaceship-style EV soundtrack are both intentionally dulled down. Rather strangely, you don't get the EV-specific drive modes that you will find in a plug-in hybrid X3 xDrive 30e. So the only other two settings that are available to you are comfort, and that maximizes the effect of the standard adaptive damping system, and there's also sport, of course, which really makes the car come alive. The sport setting, which you'll need to replicate the claimed 6.8 second rest to 62 miles an hour sprint time, doesn't only sharpen up the throttle response and the steering feel as you expect it would. If you've paid extra for a pricier Pro level trim, like the one we're trying here, it also gives you the full benefit of the iconic Sounds electric package that was created for BMW by Hollywood film composer Hans Zimmer. With this, different tunes accompany different drive modes, and it works quite well, giving a sense of speed, although to us the orchestration seems more Eurostar than Marvel. You might quickly tire of this, of course, and if so, you'll be very pleased to hear that you can turn the system off. All of this is possibly there to distract you from the fact that the powertrain recipe on offer here isn't, at first glance anyway, one befitting a mid to larger class crossover EV costing £60,000 or more. The 80 kilowatt hour battery size is fine, but a simple single motor rear wheel drive setup with just 286 horsepower is a kind of format that you'd normally think would be suited to a significantly lower price point. Whether for alternatives you're looking at top versions of mid-sized rivals or the slightly larger models that BMW wants to target here, then you'll find that other contenders for this kind of money use dual motor formats, one on each axle, and that means that they can offer four-wheel drive and, of course, an awful lot more power, typically around 350 horsepower for the ritziest mid-sized models, and around 400 horsepower for the only slightly pricier, larger EVs that BMW wants to tilt at here, like the Jaguar I-Pace and the Mercedes EQC. It's difficult to know why such a humble, rear-driven, single-motor format was chosen for this car. You don't have to have it with the top version of the brand's similarly sized i4, or with the base version of the next model up in the company's EV crossover range, the iX. And a void beneath the bonnet here seems to suggest that space for an extra front-mounted motor does exist. Perhaps it comes down to wanting to offset the weight that this car has to carry around because its CLAR modular platform wasn't designed specifically for a full battery powertrain. Now that is a mistake that Audi made with the original e-tron Quattro and Mercedes made with the EQC, and both, as a result, have driving range figures that you might easily better with the little Renault Zoe Super Mini featuring a battery almost half the size. BMW's aim here was presumably not to fall into the same trap, and sure enough, the lighter single motor format allows this iX3's range figure, up to 285 miles, to get within 7 miles of a Jaguar I-Pace, although that's not exactly a class benchmark in an era where a Tesla Model 3 long range sets a 360 mile standard. So, where have we got to? A BMW EV that lacks the expected four-wheel drive system, has a fairly low power output, and offers a driving range figure that isn't anything to write home about. Well, you might be tempted right now to go out and put the kettle on at this point, or to switch to another film instead, but don't do that, because there are lots of things about the way that this car drives that we think you might rather like. Let's start with the fact that whether its rear-driven format was chosen by accident or default, it's given this iX3 a very BMW feel, which is no small feat given that it's about half the weight of an Asian elephant, and because most of the engineering bulk is on the rear axle, it's had to forgo the brand's usual optimum 50-50 powertrain weight distribution formula. Drive at speed through a set of your favourite twisting secondary road turns, and although you'll usually be aware that this model is carrying around about 400 kilos more than an ordinary X3, you might even conclude, as we've attempted to do, that this could just be the most dynamically engaging car in its class. Well, in the dry anyway, even without moisture on the tarmac, if you find yourself running late and pushing on through those corners, you will find that this BMW just doesn't won't cling to the inside of the bend as tightly as an all-wheel drive rival would. Plus, the power and the grip you get out of the turn is less immediate. Far more of the time, though, you'll find yourself really enjoying the way that this iX3 offers a level of nimble responsiveness that most of its rivals simply don't have. Even supposedly sportier ones like, say, a Ford Mustang Mach-E. The steering's better too. It's not loaded with feedback, but it is well weighted and it allows you to place the car with confidence. And there's a general fluidity to the handling, which will remind long-time BMW owners of previous combustion models that they've loved and enjoyed. It's almost fun, which for an EV in this class is really saying something. Almost as surprising is the fact that you'll rarely find yourself wishing for more than 286 braked horses to propel this 2,260 kilo SUV along, which has a lot to do with the fact that although there may be only one electric motor in play here, it's an uber sophisticated one, a fifth generation BMW eDrive design built into the rear axle. It weighs less than the motors used by rivals, it spins right up to 17,000 revs, it produces an impressive 400 Newton meters of pulling power, and it can hold its torque for longer at higher speeds, which is why putting down your right foot at 50 miles an hour still results in very responsive acceleration. Well, actually, provided you're in sport, it's responsive all the way through the rev range, as the official 4.1 second 50 to 75 miles an hour figure shows. So overtakes are rapid but satisfying, i.e. not conducted in a manner that rather unnervingly dumps all the power under your right foot all at once, which is often the case with more powerful EV rivals. There's plenty else we like too. Ride quality is excellent. That adaptive damping is nearly as effective as the more complex air-sprung system you'd find on a comparably priced Audi e-tron 50 Quattro. And we'll hand out more merit points for refinement. In some electric cars, all the absence of combustion noise does is to highlight a succession of trim and suspension creaks and rattles, but that's absolutely not the case here. At cruising speeds, there is a bit of wind noise around the mirror housings, and there is some distant tyre roar, but that's just about it. One thing you might notice if you come to a drive in this car after trying a few of the segment alternatives is the lack of paddles behind the steering wheel for variation of brake regeneration settings. BMW thinks you don't need those. Wrongly, in our view, regenerative paddles can be helpful in spirited driving for proactively slowing the car before corner turn-in. What you get instead, though, works very effectively. To tackle the issue of proactive energy harvesting in this EV, the brand offers a recuperation area in the central screen from which you can select high, medium or low regen options. The high setting pretty much delivers that so-called one-pedal drive format, which is fashionable in EV circles these days, where the car decelerates so much off throttle that you hardly ever need to use the actual brake pedal. That's unless you're coming to a stop, of course. But you don't really need to select it because you can get much the same effect by merely pushing the gear lever from D to its left-hand regenerative B position. It is reasonable, though, to wonder whether there is really much point in doing any of this when the car's intelligent software can do the job so much better by the default adaptive recuperation screen setting. Now here, your driving is monitored either independently or in combination with the route that you've entered into the navigation system there. The system then decides whether to activate strong brake energy recuperation or instead, if you're on the highway, for example, to switch into a separate coasting function which lets the car freewheel without frictional losses when you come off the throttle. It's all good, and it reminds us that this car is much more EV than SUV, and if you needed any further prompting on that point, it's provided by news that the top speed is limited to 112 miles an hour and that the usual quite decent unbraked towing capacity you'd expect from an X3, a capable 2.4 tonnes in the diesel xDrive 30D variant, is slashed to just 750 kilos in this case. You would be unwise to venture very far off a paved surface too, not only because an iX3 has only two driven wheels shod with eco-style low rolling resistance rubber, but also because the ordinary X3's 204mm ride height is reduced to just 179mm here. In summary, this car's eventual replacement, developed from the ground up for the EV market, will obviously be a far more complete product. But as it is, this car surprised us. It's better at hiding its bulk than almost any other EV we can remember driving, which, if you're one of those being dragged rather reluctantly, let's say, into this new battery-powered era, is an attribute that's really worth checking out. The iX3 presents itself pretty much exactly as you'd expect an X3 with full battery power to look. A few blue BMW i-Performance touches, some subtle, some not, grille and headlight contours which reference the i4 and the iX, and a set of unique era-optimised wheels. Just enough for the neighbours to recognise your switch to EV-ness before they see you plugging in. Which you'll be doing using this rear near side wing flap, the socket within which is one of the very few things that sets this model's profile perspective apart from its combustion model stablemates. From the side, probably the most overt point of iX3 identification lies with the unusual alloy wheels we just mentioned, which, depending on trim, are either 19 or, as in this case, 20 inches in size. They use sophisticated inserts, and they're such an integral part of the aerodynamics that they reduce drag by 5% and add 6 miles to the driving range. This electric model's 20mm reduction in ride height probably helps here too. Otherwise, it's just as it would be with any other X3, with this long bonnet, short front overhang, standard black roof rails, and the usual firm mid-level styling crease flowing through the door handles. Because of the pricing, which is pitched slightly awkwardly between mid-sized and larger EVs, we should give you some size perspective here. Most, although not all, mid-sized EVs are slightly smaller than this one. BMW, of course, wants you to compare this car instead to the segment's pricier and supposedly larger models, which is probably fair given that one of them, Jaguar's I-Pace, is actually 26mm shorter, and like another rival on the Bavarian maker's radar, the Mercedes EQC, it has a smaller boot than an iX3 too. From the front, the iX3 is much more recognisable as a unique variant within the X3 lineup. Yes, there is the usual single-piece kidney front grille, but with the updated model, it comes with a distinctive blue accent around the edges, while the inner surfaces of the kidney grille elements have a mesh-like structure, and they feature a BMW I badge. This appendage is flanked by slim LED headlamps, while below it is a larger lower air intake which incorporates a 10-stage active air flap control to cool the drive system components and the brakes. On this model, there's no further cooling required from the narrow vertical corner intakes, so they're smaller than they would be on an ordinary X3, and like the rear-style bumper, they're only there to try to make the front end more aerodynamic. The rear has rather less subtle splashes of blue on the outer elements of the rear diffuser, and these LED rear lamps, which illuminate strikingly at night, they're marked out by a slim light graphic and three-dimensional pincer-shaped contouring. As usual, what's more significant is what you can't see, not just the absence of exhaust pipes, but the fact that, unlike most of its competitors, this car doesn't ride on any kind of bespoke electric vehicle platform. The next generation iX3 will have exactly that, the so-called new Klasse underpinnings that the brand plans to introduce in 2025. But until then, this car, like its i4 showroom stablemate, has to ride on a highly modified version of the CLAR chassis that the brand uses for all its mid-sized combustion models. Time to take a look inside. Cabin access is possible via smartphone if you've selected the digital key option and you have the right kind of handset. Via BMW's smartphone app, you can even send digital key access to family members and friends so that they can access and drive the car using their own phones. If you're doing that to allow your daughter or son to drive this BMW, you can even set up your iX3 so that power output's reduced, the audio system can't be used above a certain volume, and the safety aids can't be turned off. All good to know. Right, let's get comfortable. Now, BMW's clear aim here was obviously to make the transition to full electric drive as seamless as possible. So much so that you'd be hard-pressed to notice any changes at all here at the wheel over an ordinary X3, but there are some. The gear selector, for example, has a blue stripe on it, so does the door trim. There's a silver plaque below the ventilation controls saying iX3, and the start button's blue. Apart from some extra EV menu options on the central screen, that's about it though. Otherwise, everything will be very familiar if you speak the Bavarian maker's current design language. You're seated in the pleasingly commanding position that you'll want if you've chosen an iX3 rather than BMW's other EV at this size and price point, the i4 Saloon. As in that car, all the materials used feel great to the touch. The ergonomics are difficult to fault. The Vanasca leather upholstery seems to be of the premium sort, and the cool metal trimming also feels suitably special. Like all of BMW's latest mid-size models, this one gets the brand's Live Cockpit Professional package, and that gets you a couple of large screens, a 12.3-inch one for the instrument binnacle and one of a similar size, the control display for the centre stack. The instrument cluster display initially looked familiar until you realise that on the right-hand side, where there'd normally be a rev counter, there is instead an e-power percentage power meter, and that briefs you on your current energy consumption. And on the left, where the fuel gauge would normally be, there's a battery indicator with a range readout just next to it. As usual with BMW instrument screens, this one's not very customizable. You can't change the display style or get full screen mapping, for example. In fact, your options are limited to merely turning the central mapping graphics on or off, or selecting a reduced mode, which takes away the gauge numerals. We have no issues with this centre stack screen though, which showcases the fact that BMW has matched and in some cases exceeded the current media connectivity class standard here. This advanced infotainment package includes what the brand calls the Intelligent Personal Assistant. This is a supposed fount of all knowledge which responds to voiced commands, much as would the Alexa system, Siri on an Apple phone, or the Google Assistant feature on an Android handset. BMW insist that this setup is rather cleverer than those ones. You can give it a name if you think that that'll help you to bond with it better. And the press kit tells us that we can even ask it the meaning of life. It is rather more likely, of course, that you'll be using it to make day-to-day driving just a bit easier. If you tell it you're cold, then it'll turn up the temperature. If you don't understand a particular feature, it'll trot out some explanatory text from the online handbook. Or you might want it to switch on the heated seats, defrost the windows, or change your radio station. To wake the system up, you simply preface whatever you want to say with the command, "Hey BMW." Provision of this lower centre screen rotary controller, a rare feature in this segment, allows this car to set the class standard for infotainment functionality. And if you're graduating on from an earlier combustion X3, you'll be pleased to find that both the top of this capstan controller and the screen surface are now touch sensitive as standard. Plus, in an age where many rivals dispensing with audio volume control knobs, we were pleased to find one retained here. You'll quickly get to grips with the calm, measured graphics of the operating system 7.0 Monitor 2. The layout's clear and logical. The sidebar menu gives you media, communication, navigation, car and apps options, and those are also duplicated by buttons next to the iDrive controller. These shortcut options connect you into features like the DAB audio system, 4G LTE connectivity and connected sat-nav. All of that is standard fare. There's an awful lot of connected drive digital stuff too, a wide range of BMW vehicle apps, for example, that give you access to things like news reports and weather forecasts, and a concierge service which connects you through to an operator to help with journeying information. Plus, the system can remotely update its own software, and there's also what BMW calls an open mobility cloud that, via a clever My BMW app, can allow you to interact with the car when you're not in it, for example, allowing you to remotely view it in 3D. There are caveats here though. Wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring functionality is these days standard on BMWs without limit, but many of this Munich maker's digital services remain life limited before becoming chargeable, some for 3 years and others like BMW Music, which brings your favourite soundtracks into the car, and Microsoft Office 365 for just 3 months. To some extent you can't help feeling that that's the case of the brand giving with one hand and taking away with the other. Getting comfortable is easy thanks to loads of adjustment for the seat and the wheel. The amount of rearward seat travel that you get is particularly generous. But we don't think it's acceptable for base versions of a car that's this expensive to do without features like front seat lumbar support, although the chairs do feature great side support and they position you perfectly in front of this 3-spoke wheel. And you can program them to automatically heat themselves when the outside temperature drops below a certain level. This car has quite a few little pleasing touches like that. Take the way that you can program it to automatically open the driver's window when you reach a selected GPS destination, like approaching a ticket barrier or a security checkpoint outside your office. There's also a selectable caring car feature on the central infotainment screen, which uses music, lighting and the climate control in a 3-minute long session, which will either vitalise or relax you. Now, yes, it's a gimmick. Yes, you'll be pleased to have it after the kind of long day at the office that made it possible for you to run a new iX3 in the first place. As you'd hope for the money being asked here, build quality from the Chinese Shenyang plant is suited to be faultless, and as we suggested earlier, it all feels very high-end, helped by plenty of piano black trim and nice little touches like the contrast stitching on the binnacle cowl and on the door cards. Little stylistic details really make a cabin like this. This Sensatech stitched dashtop covering, for example, the subtle ambient lighting that can bathe the cabin in shades of green, yellow, orange, blue, lilac or white, and the embossed silver X badges concealed on the inner door edging. When it comes to cabin practicality, BMW achieves the required class standard, but no more. Pull back this beautifully damped, slatted sliding top, concealing this area at the base of the centre stack, and you'll find a couple of cup holders along with a 12-volt port and a USB-C point, plus there's a wireless phone charging mat. Another USB-C point can be found in this good-sized, nicely lit lidded box between the seats, and the door bins are compartmentalised and averagely sized with bottle holders. An overhead sunglasses compartment that's missing. Quite a lot of the glove box is taken up by a handbook that you don't really need because there's a digital handbook section in the central screen, but you do get a flock-lined cubby by the driver's right knee and ticket clips on the sun visors. That reasonably commanding driving position and the thin A-pillars mean that frontward visibility is fine, plus the deep window line helps when you're viewing to the side. You might be minded to criticise the rear 3/4 vision, blame those thick D-pillars, but that issue is mitigated somewhat by a whole bank of technology that'll help you to slot into spaces, all-round parking sensors, a rear-view camera and a parking assistant to steer you into tight bays or standard, as is a reversing assistant that activates with green or red strips on the steering wheel spokes and automatically reverses you along whatever path you'd previously taken forward. That top Pro spec also gets you an upgraded Harman Kardon audio system and a head-up display with an exceptionally large projection area. Oh, and at this pricier level in the range, you'll also get a gesture control feature which recognises up to 6 gestures via a 3D sensor at the base of the display. So a twirl of your outstretched finger will vary the volume control, while a jab towards the screen will allow you to answer a call. The idea is that these kinds of gestures can be performed without taking your eyes off the road. In practice, we've found the sensor's response to be frustratingly patchy unless precisely the right kind of motion is performed, and that often leaves you in a situation where you're doing nothing more than making what appear to be obscene gestures at other road users. Let's take a seat in the back. Now, earlier we were talking about the fact that this iX3 is a little longer than conventional mid-sized EVs. Not by much, but every little helps, and that extra length could make a difference in the rear. So let's see. It does, and by more than you'd think actually. Helped by recesses in the front seat backs, a 6-footer will be able to sit comfortably behind a driver of similar size, which is about as much as you can ask of a mid-sized SUV of this sort. Even the centre perch isn't as uncomfortable as you'll find it to be in most obvious rivals, although the occupant concerned will have to negotiate a centre transmission tunnel raised with the kind of prominence you'd think a rear-driven EV really wouldn't need. There's no seat sliding functionality such as you'd find on BMW's smaller X1 crossover. The huge battery pack beneath the seats puts paid to any thought of that, but the backrest does at least recline, which surprisingly is a rare feature in this class. Otherwise, irritations are few. Some might question BMW's decision to provide twin USB-C rather than USB-A sockets as a means for rear passengers to charge their various electronic devices. You might need a converter lead, and a few parents might wish that an ISOFIX child seat fastening was provided for the middle seat as well as for the two outer ones. Otherwise, there's precious little to criticise here. A smart set of ventilation controls are provided with twin vents, plus there are seatback nets, coat hooks and the grab handles, and this fold-down central armrest here has a shallow lidded tray and pop-out cup holders. iX3 customers also enjoy the standard fitment of this panoramic glass roof, which means that what would otherwise be a rather dark cabin can be flooded with a welcome burst of sunlight. And unless you're of basketball playing stature, it doesn't overly compromise headroom. What about luggage space? You'd expect some beneath the bonnet in a modern EV of this size these days, but lift the bonnet here and you discover that under this big plastic cover is just a void that could have accommodated either a frunk for luggage or, as we pointed out in our driving section, an electric motor for the front axle to make this car four-wheel driven. As it is, the space has been left unused, perhaps the biggest giveaway that this model hasn't been designed on a bespoke EV platform. So let's turn instead to look at the cargo space you do have out back. First impressions are encouraging. For a start, you get an electrically operated tailgate as standard. With top pro spec, it's embellished with a comfort access feature, which allows you to raise it by waving your foot beneath the bumper if, key in pocket, you approach the car with both your hands laden down with bags. Once this powered hatch rises, you're provided with 510 litres of capacity. That's 40 litres less than an ordinary X3, although it's 60 litres more than you'll get in a plug-in hybrid X3 xDrive 30e. If you happen to be comparing against BMW's i4 EV model, you'll get 40 litres less in one of those in a cargo area which is very similarly sized to what you'll get in alternative mid to larger sized crossover segment models like the Jaguar I-Pace, the Mercedes EQC and the Ford Mustang Mach-E. It's a huge 150 litres smaller, though, than the boot you get in a comparably priced Audi e-tron Quattro SUV. Pull up this floor panel and you'll find there's a bit of underfloor storage, although only in the section nearer to you. The extreme shallowness of this further underfloor storage area suggests that it would only be really any use for items that you'd recently run over. There's no kind of spare wheel, that's no surprise in an EV, although it would be nice if, in compensation for the way that battery placement robs the underfloor of the space required for that important item, BMW fitted run-flat tyres. As it is, as with most models in this segment, you'll be stuck at the side of the road instead with a tyre inflation kit if you have a puncture. In terms of practicality, recessed areas to the left and right mean that wide items can be easily swallowed, say a set of golf clubs inserted widthwise. The light on the inner part of the tailgate shines down to illuminate the area at night, and on the right-hand side there's a 12-volt socket and a pull-out bag hook, while on the left you get a netted storage area. This rather impractical stainless steel boot lip finisher is flanked by silver tie-down hooks with two further ones further back. What if you need more room? Well, if the item in question is merely long and thin, like a set of skis, it may suffice merely to flatten the middle part of this standard 40-20-40 split folding rear backrest. Quite a few rivals fob you off with a less versatile ski hatch, or worse, a much less convenient 60-40 seat back split. And because the rear seat back reclines, it's possible to push it up to a straighter angle, and that could make all the difference in getting awkwardly sized cargo in, say large items of luggage on an airport run. If, though, you really need to supersize your space, then it's obviously a case of pushing forward the rear bench using these catches here on either corner just inside the tailgate. Once they've been pulled, a 1,560 litre cargo area is revealed. Again, 40 litres less than you'll get in the ordinary X3. There's no option to further extend this space by specifying a fold-flat front passenger seat, but the area you do get is usefully flat and square. From the launch of the updated iX3 in mid-2021, BMW was asking from around £60,000 for the M Sport version of this car. Ideally, though, you'd want to stretch to the better-equipped M Sport Pro variant, which at the time of this test in autumn 2021 was pitched at around £63,000, and we've got the Pro Spec version here. To begin with, you'll need some X3 perspective on those figures. The Bavarian maker wants around £50,000 for either its conventional diesel-powered X3 xDrive 30D, which has 48-volt mild hybrid tech and the same 286 horsepower power output as an iX3, or for its more electrified plug-in hybrid X3 xDrive 30E, which has a fairly similar 252 horsepower power output and can travel up to 34 miles between charges. As the badging in each case suggests, both of those alternatives have the advantage of the xDrive four-wheel drive system that this iX3 lacks. We should also give you some BMW EV perspective. If you're not hung up on having an SUV body style, then around £52,000, so about £8,000 less than the iX3 pricing, would get you a four-door Gran Turismo style BMW, the brand's i4 in rear-driven eDrive 40 form with the same battery and platform, but with much more driving range, up to 367 miles. Also worth pointing out that you wouldn't have to pay that much more to get the brand's very largest EV model, the iX, which is an SUV, and that car does have four-wheel drive. In base xDrive 40 form, which gives you a 71 kilowatt-hour battery pack and only slightly less driving range, at the time of this test, the Bavarian maker wanted around £70,000 for that model. If, having considered all that, you're still interested in an iX3, you'll need to consider its price positioning against directly comparable rivals, which, as we've said elsewhere in this film, is slightly awkward. This car's £60,000 price point is a slug more than the usual crowd of upper mid-sized EVs and a slug less than the smallest, larger segment models, which BMW ideally wants to target here. Let's get more specific. If, prior to looking at an iX3, you'd been considering the biggest battery versions of popular mid-sized EVs, you'd immediately notice that pricing here is £10,000 to £15,000 higher. Now, specifically, we're talking about the longer range versions of cars like Ford's Mustang Mach-E, the Polestar 2, the Kia EV6, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, the Lexus UX300E, the Volvo XC40 Recharge Pure Electric, the Mercedes EQB, the Cupra Born, the Audi Q4 e-tron, Volkswagen's ID4 or ID5, and the two segment contenders from Tesla, the Model 3 Saloon and the Model Y hatch. BMW points out that most of those are slightly smaller cars, which is true, but we'd respond by observing that many of these models can match or beat an iX3 for boot space, and that top versions have the all-wheel drive system that, as we've said, this iX3 lacks. But let's say you agree with the Bavarian maker's position here and you've been actively considering the slightly larger EV crossovers, which the company thinks ought to represent this car's target market. How does it stack up against those? Well, you decide. The models that we are specifically talking about here, they are the Audi e-tron 50 Quattro, the Jaguar I-Pace and the Mercedes EQC, and all three come with the key upfront advantage of a dual motor drivetrain, so four-wheel drive. Costing from around £60,000, the Audi is also very similarly priced to an iX3 and is quite a bit bigger, but its heavy weight hobbles it in terms of both driving dynamics and driving range, which for the 50 Quattro is a huge 74 miles less than what you get from this BMW. Even the bigger battery e-tron 55 Quattro variant, which at the time of this test cost over £71,000, can't quite match an iX3's driving range. So you might well feel that either the EQC or the I-Pace might represent a better match to what's on offer here. But if you do, you'll need a thicker wad of cash. Think around £5,000 more than BMW's asking here for base versions of both those cars, but quite a few thousand more if you want a specification which matches that of even a base iX3. Plus, this Bavarian model is similarly sized inside and in the boot. Plus, crucially, it's more efficient, as you'd hope it would be, given that only one electric motor is in play here. It has the same 80 kilowatt-hour battery size as the EQC, yet it manages to go over 40 miles more on each charge. And although an I-Pace has a larger 90 kilowatt-hour battery, it can go just 6 miles further on each charge. Having considered all that, you might find yourself making a credible case for iX3 ownership. And if you are, then the deal might be sealed Bavaria's way by a decently generous standard equipment tally. Is that what's on offer here, though? Well, let's take a look and see. Let's start with base M Sport spec. Now that comes with 19-inch aerodynamic M bi-colour alloy wheels, roof rails, M aerodynamic body styling with BMW i-specific blue decorative elements. There are power folding mirrors, there's sun protection glass, there's a powered tailgate, and there's welcome light puddle lights which illuminate the ground when you open the doors at night. The adaptive LED headlamps have a high beam assistant, plus you get all-round parking sensors, a rear-view camera and a parking assistant that can automatically steer you into a space. And there's adaptive suspension too, which works with the drive mode settings, cruise control with a speed limiting function, and there's also a whole range of camera safety and driving assistance features, and those are courtesy of the standard inclusion of BMW's Driving Assistant Professional package. And we're going to get onto that in just a few minutes. There is no spare wheel though of any kind. That's not ideal on an SUV, but BMW does at least, alongside the usual Type 2 Mode 3 cable for public and wallbox charging, supply a charging cable with a 3-pin plug for domestic socket use, and that's something that costs extra with some EVs. That comes part of a flexible fast charging lead onto which you can clip other optional sockets for a 3-phase supply, for example. Inside, M Sport trim gets you Vernasca leather upholstery, a panoramic glass sunroof, a heated M Sport leather steering wheel, a dash top in stitched Sensatec artificial leather, heated and electrically powered front sport seats with memory settings and an anthracite headliner. There's also 3-zone automatic air conditioning, there's ambient lighting, there's an auto-dimming rear-view mirror, and there's also the kind of reclining 40-20-40 split rear backrest that most rival models make you do without. There's plenty of media tech too via BMW's Live Cockpit Professional package. That gives you a 12.3-inch instrument display and a centre dash control display monitor of the same size, which uses the 7th generation version of BMW's iDrive operating system and software. This includes Apple CarPlay and Android Auto wireless smartphone integration, and that allows you to access digital services like Google Assistant, Google Maps, music streaming services like Spotify and Amazon Music, and also the WhatsApp messaging service too. The central control display also includes a decent quality DAB audio system with a quadruple tuner, plus the ability to implement a Wi-Fi hotspot. And there's cloud-based BMW Maps navigation. That includes route planning with recommendations for charging stops, and that has the ability to filter search results down to fast charging points, and even information on points of interest near charging stations too. Voice control, that comes courtesy of the BMW Intelligent Personal Assistant System. Now this learns your preferences, and it's also familiar with your favoured settings, say for the seat heating or for the places you frequently drive to, using that navigation system. It also responds directly to the prompt, "Hey BMW." As brand loyalists would expect, this iX3 also includes plenty of the brand's really clever digital connectivity features too, and that includes a full suite of BMW Connected Package Pro services. So things like real-time traffic information, now this will warn you of congestion along your chosen route, and connected parking. Now this offers multi-storey and on-street parking information in selected cities in the UK and in Europe. There's also BMW's concierge services, which at the press of a button will give you direct access to an operator, and that operator will be able to answer almost any question about your journey as you drive it. And the Connected Package Pro package also includes connected music that offers unlimited streaming of millions of songs into the vehicle from Spotify. In-car experiences, they're one-shot cabin modes which are able to instantly adapt the interior ambience to suit your mood. Plus, there's also the company's suite of BMW vehicle apps, which give you access to things like news reports, weather forecasts for up to 4 days ahead, and also information on highway tolls. In addition, the system can remotely update itself with fresh features and with fresh mapping upgrades. And of course, it will also read out your text messages to you. We'll also mention BMW teleservices, which can decide when a garage visit's due and automatically book it for you. And as a customer of this Munich maker, you'll get a 3-month trial of the connected teaser package, which gives you BMW music. That allows you to export your favourite soundtracks into the car. If you've owned a BMW before, then you might be familiar with the standard remote services package. Now this allows you to control many aspects of your vehicle's operation via your smartphone, and you will maybe also recognise the downloadable My BMW app. Now on this EV, you can use that to preset charging times and to remotely pre-warm or pre-cool the cabin before you get into it. As with other more conventional BMW models, this app can also learn your mobility routines, it can read your calendar, and it can even prompt you when to leave for scheduled journeys. It'll get familiar with your most frequently travelled routes, and it will memorise them as future destinations too. Plus, the app will also help you to find your car if you've gone and forgotten where you parked it. And it can also remotely lock or unlock the doors. All of this is included with standard M Sport trim, but if you're able to stretch to the plushest M Sport Pro variant, you'll get the real niceties. Now these included upgraded Harman Kardon surround sound audio system, gesture control, which allows you to operate the infotainment system there with the twirl of your fingers, and perhaps most temptingly, the brand's iconic Sounds Electric package. Now this is a system of subtle synthesized noises which are pumped into the interior, and they match the braking and acceleration inputs. There are sounds created in collaboration with the famous Hollywood film composer Hans Zimmer. M Sport Pro trim is also set apart by larger 20-inch wheels and by darkened headlights. Plus, you get a head-up display, front seat lumbar support, and comfort access keyless entry, which also allows you to open the tailgate by gesture control. There's a better auto parking system too, Parking Assistant Plus, which provides improved visualization of your parking maneuvers thanks to a system of additional cameras. The actual functions and method of operation are unchanged, but you get a better view of what's happening around you, which improves safety and confidence in the system. The cameras are also used to extend the driver's view when you're approaching junctions and visually restricted exits. The same cameras are also employed in another clever M Sport Pro feature, the brand's Drive Recorder. This is like a dash cam except a lot more sophisticated. The Drive Recorder system uses inbuilt cameras to record video footage from different points around the vehicle before storing the event and crash recordings so that they can be either watched later on the control display or exported via the USB port. Recordings can be up to 40 seconds long. For accident playback, you get 20 seconds before the impact and the 20 seconds after it. You want to get the look of your iX3 just as you want it. Here we've got mineral white paintwork, but you could also choose to have your car in carbon black, Sophisto grey or Phytonic blue. Who thinks of these names? There are no alternative wheel size or style options, but you can do a lot with the interior. There are mocha or oyster upholstery shades if you don't want the usual black. And as an alternative to the standard high gloss black trim, there's the no-cost alternative of trim in either aluminium rhombical or aluminium fine cutting. On to options. As with any EV, you'll need to keep some budget aside for a garage charging system if you haven't had an electric car before. BMW's partnered with BP Pulse to offer what it calls a personal wall box, a home charge unit which offers 7 kilowatt charging, and at the time of this test cost from around £550, including the available OZ EV grant. This is able to monitor energy usage and cost, as well as keeping a historic record of home charging energy expenditure. And that makes it very convenient for company car users. As for individual extra cost items not related to either aesthetics or charging, well, the main thing for you to spend money on is the BMW laser light headlight system, which for £1,500 more offers piercing blue-themed beams, which give you a range of 600 metres. You can also add a tow bar, although given that this car's permitted unbraked trailer load is just 750 kilos, you probably won't want to. Safety is, as you'd expect from BMW, well accounted for, hence this car's full house 5-star Euro NCAP safety rating. There's lots of camera safety stuff, headlined as usual by BMW's Active Guard system, which is based around forward collision warning technology. At over 30 miles an hour, the vehicle scans the road ahead for potential accident hazards, and if one's detected, you'll be warned, and the brakes will be preconditioned for maximum effectiveness. If you're travelling at under 30 miles an hour and you're not responding to a detected hazard, then the brakes will automatically be applied, and that reduces the severity of any resulting accident and hopefully avoids it altogether. Before we brief you on the other camera safety features, we should also underline the fact that all the safety basics are here well covered off too. That means twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus front and rear ISOFIX child seat fastenings, and the usual electronic assistance for traction and stability control, primarily DSC Plus stability control and DTC traction control. There's plenty of braking peace of mind too, with the ABS system supplemented by fading compensation, CBC, that's cornering brake control, and the neat brake drying system which keeps the brake discs free of moisture in wet weather. Panic stops, they're aided by a brake assist system, and they're advertised to following motorists by dynamic brake lights which flash a bright warning. You also get a multi-collision braking function which, in the event of an impact, will keep brake pressure applied until you come to a complete stop. Other neat safety features fitted as standard include an alertness assistant which monitors you for signs of drowsiness, a trailer stabilisation function which will stop trailer sway if you have a trailer fitted, and hill start assistant to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. And there's the BMW emergency call with teleservices system, which in an accident can automatically alert the emergency services. Now, this system not only gives them your exact GPS location, but it also provides recovery personnel with information on your speed at point of impact, how hard the seatbelts were pulled, how many of the airbags burst, and so on. So if you were to have a crash, it would all mean not only that the emergency teams would know exactly where you were, of course, but also that they would arrive on the scene more prepared and more ready to get you to safety than they could ever otherwise be. It's a potentially life-saving difference. In more recent times, this setup has been further improved to also automatically activate after low-speed collisions, which are below the threshold for airbag deployment. Immediately after the impact, it flashes up an iDrive screen message which offers to contact BMW's Accident Assistance Service directly. All the other safety features you need to know about, including the really sophisticated camera-driven ones, are included within BMW's Driving Assistant Professional Pack. Now, this is normally an expensive technology pack option on other BMWs, but it's standard here with both iX3 variants. It includes the choicest parts of BMW's safety camera and autonomous driving technology, as you're just about to hear. The autonomous driving part of the Driving Assistant Professional Pack lies primarily with two elements. There's active cruise control with approach control, and that's there to regulate your distance to the vehicle in front, and it's able, if necessary, to even slow you right down to a stop and then start you off again. It incorporates a radar-based approach control function which senses other traffic around you and can adapt throttle and brakes accordingly. But the real highlight of the Driving Assistant Professional Pack is BMW's now improved steering and lane control assistant, which takes its bearings from road markings and vehicles driving ahead using data from a trifocal camera and a front-range radar. That enables it to work with the driver to help to centre the car in the detected lane with corrective steering input. The setup can make corrective steering interventions at speeds of up to 130 miles an hour, although you do have to keep your hands on the wheel at all times. Now, we've found that it works particularly well in heavy traffic, especially now that it's been updated to include the brand's latest active navigation tech. Now, this system uses navigation data to spot in advance when a lane change will be required. In preparation, the system will automatically adjust the car's speed, and that's to make it easier to steer into a suitable gap in the adjacent lane. Now, we mentioned that this Driving Assistant Professional Pack also includes a whole suite of BMW's latest camera safety tech, so let's brief you on that. There's active lane guidance, which adds subtle steering lock to ease you back to where you ought to be if the lane departure warning system that we mentioned earlier detects that you've inadvertently veered over the carriage lane delineating lines. In addition, as part of this extra cost pack, you'll also get BMW's lane keeping assistant with active side collision protection package. This incorporates side collision warning and lane change warning, all of which stops you from pulling out when there's a vehicle in your blind spot, and it adds in light steering intervention, which will ease you back to where you ought to be on the road if you drift offline. We also like the pack's crossing traffic warning front feature, which alerts you to oncoming vehicles if you're trying to edge out of a junction and you can't completely see traffic coming at you from either side. There's also automatic speed limit assist. Now, that works with the traffic sign recognition system, and this recognises speed limits and prevents you from exceeding them. And we haven't finished yet either. The Driving Assistant Professional Pack also includes an evasion aid, which gives you extra steering assistance in critical situations where it's still possible to avoid an accident. Say, for example, someone pulls out in front of you, or you suddenly have to make a dramatic lane change to avoid slow-moving traffic. Plus, there's also crossroads warning that incorporates give way warning, and that alerts you to traffic coming at you from the sides at a crossroads. And finally, as the name suggests, wrong way warning makes an enormous fuss if you forget yourself and end up going the wrong way down a one-way street. It's all really reassuring. You can generally tell quite easily when an EV doesn't have a platform that was specifically designed for a full battery powertrain. It'll be heavier, and as a result, the driving range that's available to you between charges, that will be significantly lower. Which is why in the class of car that we're looking at here, a Jaguar I-Pace with a bespoke EV platform goes so much further, 292 miles, than similarly priced rivals that don't, like the Mercedes EQC, a best of 245 miles, and the Audi e-tron 50 Quattro, just 211 miles. With the iX3 though, the waters are muddied somewhat. It runs on a modular platform which isn't bespoke for battery power, but was, according to BMW, developed from the outset with an EV powertrain in mind. This somewhat fudged compromise, together with the use of a more efficient electric motor than rivals offer, and the fact that thanks to the rear-driven format, only one motor is used, has kept the WLTP range figure acceptable. If you've watched our driving experience section, then you'll already know that BMW quotes a best possible WLTP rated stats of between 281 and 285 miles. If you've perused the market for mid to large sized EVs of this kind, you won't be getting too excited about that reading. The longest running versions of models like the Polestar 2 and the Tesla Model 3 can take you way over the 300-mile mark between charges, as can BMW's own i4 eDrive 40, a Gran Turismo style saloon that's similarly priced to this iX3 with basically the same battery, which also runs on the Bavarian maker's modular platform and manages to use it to record a very creditable range of 367 miles. If you wanted a snapshot of the efficiency downside in choosing an SUV like this iX3 rather than a more conventional four-door like the i4, you've got it right there, 81 miles less driving range. As with any EV, to get anywhere near the quoted range figures, you're going to need to drive with the most frugal of the drive modes engaged, in this case Eco Pro, and you're going to need to make the most of the car's proactive and very advanced brake regeneration system. Now fortunately that's not very difficult if you follow the advice in the handbook and keep that set up in its automatic adaptive mode. Here, cameras, sensors and data from the navigation system are all used for optimum regeneration harvesting, autonomously altering the level of brake recuperation according to road conditions. For example, if there's a stop sign ahead, then full recuperation will be automatically engaged. If you'd rather take control of the process yourself, there are screen selectable high, medium and low recuperation levels, or you can merely push the gear selector into its B position. That maximizes recuperation, and it means that you'll rarely have to actually use the brake pedal. Optimized aerodynamics also claw back precious miles. The sleeker wheels, for example, they're worth an extra 6 miles of range on a full charge. It all explains this car's very competitive quoted energy consumption figure of 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour. That's not bad for something that weighs as much as a Range Rover sized BMW X7. To give you some segment perspective there, when we tested a rival Mercedes EQC, we were getting around 2.4 miles per kilowatt hour. Mind you, perhaps we're getting a bit hung up here on the whole issue of drive range and energy maximisation. It's perfectly possible to argue that a mediocre range reading on an EV might not matter all that much if it's been engineered for the fastest possible charging. This iX3 hasn't been though. BMW hasn't on any of its EVs yet introduced the 800 volt battery architecture which you would find in say a Porsche Taycan or the Audi e-tron GT, but that only benefits you with faster charging times if you're able to find one of the new generation of ultra-fast 270 kilowatt public chargers, which are few and far between in Europe and vanishingly rare here. Aware of this, BMW decided, perhaps understandably, that there wasn't much point in making customers pay for charging tech that they'd hardly ever be able to use, and has instead concentrated on developing its 5th generation eDrive technology to ensure that customers can make optimum use of what they have here. Hence a much greater energy density in the 80 kilowatt hour battery, of which 74 kilowatt hours is usable. Hence also this car's incredibly complex electric motor, which integrates gearing, high voltage components, wiring and traction control sensors within its housing, and an innovative charging unit which sends power to both the 400 volt battery and the 12 volt onboard power supply. When you're charging using alternating current, it enables both single phase and, more unusually, 3-phase charging at up to 11 kilowatts. all of which means that from a conventional 7 kilowatt home wall box, charging is just about possible overnight. Think 11 hours and 45 minutes empty to full. Thanks to BMW's partnership with BP Pulse, a home charge unit wall box of that sort could, at the time of this test in autumn 2021, be fitted to your garage for £549. That includes the available OZEV grant. This wall box will be able to monitor energy usage and cost, as well as keeping a historic record of home charging energy expenditure, and that makes it very convenient for company car users. If your home power supply can accommodate a wall box of the more powerful 11 kilowatt sort, then you could reduce your charging time from empty to full to around 8 hours instead. Obviously, plugging into a conventional domestic 3-pin socket, that would take a yawningly long time, think around 24 hours, but BMW does, at least as standard, supply a lead that allows you to do that. That's the sort of thing that quite a few other brands make you pay extra for. That comes as part of a flexible fast charging lead onto which you can clip other optional sockets for a 3-phase supply, for example. What about if you want to charge when you're out and about? Well, plugging the vehicle into a DC, a direct current, rapid charging station opens the door to rapid charging outputs of up to 150 kilowatts, meaning that the high voltage battery can be charged from 0 to 80% of its full capacity in 34 minutes. And that's just about enough time for a cafe au lait and a strudel, as 62 miles of driving range is added for every 10 minutes of charging. As an iX3 customer, you'll have access to the BMW charging package. Now that opens up to you one of the world's very largest public charging networks using just one RFID card or app. In this country, you'll be able to use charge points operated by BP Pulse, ESB, Osprey, Source London, ChargePoint Network UK and others. High-power charging stations via the Ionity network are also part of the BMW charging network. Combined, this gives drivers access to over 8,500 AC and 1,500 DC charging points across the UK, plus a further 162,000 AC and 11,000 DC charging points across Europe. Finding all these stations is aided by the cloud-based BMW Maps navigation system, which, once you've input your route, will give you recommendations for charging stops, plus also the ability to filter search results by fast charging points, and even information on points of interest near those charging stations if your passengers wish to take a stroll while you're plugged up. For drivers who use public charging more frequently, BMW Charging offers 2 monthly subscription packages. Yes, we know charging stats are boring, but it is worth listening to these if you're going to choose this car, because both of the packages that we're just about to brief you on come free, included with that subscription for the first 12 months of iX3 ownership. For starters, there's the BP Pulse package. Now this is based around preferential pricing for use of charging stations in the BP Pulse network. There are around 5,500 of those in the UK, and which, if you want to continue using it from year 2 onwards, will cost £7.85 per month. With this package, customers using up to 22 kilowatt AC pay just 16 pence per kilowatt hour. Up to 43 kilowatt AC or 50 kilowatt DC, it's 23 pence per kilowatt hour. And up to 150 kilowatt DC, it's 27 pence per kilowatt hour. The second available public charging option is the Ionity Plus package, which, as the name suggests, is for drivers who habitually use and want preferential rates for the Ionity charging network for using up to 350 kilowatt DC fast charging. The preferential rate in question is 26 pence per kilowatt hour. For reference, the normal rate is 43 pence per kilowatt hour, and the package price from year 2 of ownership onwards will be £11.30 per month. Got all that? Good. So how much could charging an X3 rather than pouring fuel into it save you? BMW has an electrified section of its website which tells you that, according to the company's figures, based on 12,000 miles a year, with fuel costs of £1.40 per litre, you'd pay £2,182.12 to run a petrol or diesel X3. In contrast, based on a kilowatt-hour electricity cost of 17 pence per unit, you'd need just £379.44 to run an iX3 over the same period and the same mileage, which is a saving of £1,802.68, which does make you think, doesn't it? And of course, you won't only be saving money on energy costs. Driving into congestion charge zones will be free for an iX3 owner, well, until 2025 anyway. And you should also make savings in VED road tax. Specifically, there's no VED charge to pay for year one of ownership, nor will you be saddled with the premium VED supplement, which owners of a luxury car of this size and price would normally be expected to find. More significantly, your company benefit-in kind taxation rating will be pitched at 1%, which at the time of this test meant that an annual payment of around £247 would be due for a higher rate 40% earner, or from around £124 for lower rated owners. It's then just 2% for the second year of ownership. Obviously, the driver will need to do his or her part for ultimate driving efficiency, and in pursuit of that, you'll want to keep an eye on how frugal your recent mileage has been. Journey data, part of the central dash infotainment screen's driving information section, that shows a useful graph to brief you on that. And that's based around time and miles per kilowatt hour energy consumption. The same section also has an energy flow graphic, and that shows you at any time what's being powered by what. And there's also a driving style analysis screen, which when the Eco Pro mode's activated, rates your driving with marks out of 5 for anticipation and acceleration, and also works out the extra mileage range that deactivating the air conditioning might get you. While we're on screens, I will tell you that in the vehicle status section of the centre dash display, there's a general check control that allows you to oversee things like tyre pressure and service requirements. Plus, you can use a clever teleservices feature, which comes as part of the BMW Connected Drive services that you can also access through the iDrive infotainment system. Via this, before each service appointment's due, your iX3 can automatically put in a teleservices call to your nominated BMW service centre, and that's complete with detailed information on vehicle condition. You'll then get a call to arrange a service appointment, and that's something that you'll already have budgeted for if, at the point of original purchase, you opted for one of the 2 fixed cost service inclusive or service inclusive plus packages. Now, they cover you for 5 years or 50,000 miles. With these, after a one-off payment, you'll have the peace of mind of knowing that all the normal work that's due on the car has been paid for during that period, and that includes items like wiper blades and filters. What else might you need to know? Insurance. Well, the M Sport model is rated at Group 44E. For the M Sport Pro, it's 45E. There's obviously a wide BMW dealer network, and you'll only need to visit your local franchise every 2 years or every 18,000 miles for maintenance, and that's whichever comes around first. Servicing should be less expensive than for a combustion engined X3 model. This electric version does, after all, have 20% fewer moving parts, and thanks to the recuperation management system and this model's very limited use of friction braking, you'll hardly ever have to replace the brake pads. The brand reckons every 6 years should be enough. This model is covered by a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty, plus BMW issues an 8-year or 100,000 mile warranty that guarantees battery performance, although not to 100%. This iX3 also has 12 years of corrosion cover and a 3-year paint guarantee. When you decide to sell on your car, you should find that this BMW's premium reputation will help to shore up its value. As for depreciation, well, this BMW was recently recognised as one of the industry's top 10 slowest depreciating EVs. After 3 years and 36,000 miles, it was projected to hold on to 62.06% of its original value, which, to give you some segment perspective, is fractionally behind a Volkswagen ID4 and a Volvo XC40 Recharge Pure Electric, but it is fractionally ahead of a Skoda Enyaq iV and a Polestar 2. As usual, bear in mind that depreciation will take a hit if you load up your car with too many unnecessary pricey extras. Let's finish with a few thoughts on eco-mindedness. BMW claims that owning an iX3 reduces your CO2 footprint compared to a conventional X3 xDrive 20D diesel by more than 30% when you're charging with a conventional electricity supply, and by up to 60% when you're exclusively using green energy. The whole zero emissions ethos championed in this case, as with all EVs, is fictitious. Of course, the energy to drive this car has to cause pollution somewhere, but BMW is trying hard here. Over 99% of the waste generated by BMW Group production these days, over 2.5 million vehicles annually, is recycled and recovered. And if we get specific with this iX3, over 96% of this car's battery can be recycled. The cobalt and lithium used in the battery pack is purchased directly by BMW and shipped to a company which assembles them on the Bavarian maker's behalf, ensuring that suppliers can be monitored for ethical practices. The battery pack, by the way, also uses 62% less cobalt per kilowatt hour than you'll find in the BMW i3's battery. And that gives you some idea of just how much EV tech has moved on since 2014, although reaching that figure has required the brand to increase the amount of nickel that it uses in production, which hasn't been uncontroversial. Back in 2011, the BMW i division was founded, and when in 2013 it announced its first car, the groundbreaking little i3 with its futuristic carbon fibre monocoque chassis, we all thought that the Bavarians had stolen a march on their premium brand rivals when it came to EV technology. We certainly didn't think that it would be another 7 years before we saw the company's next full EV, or that when we did, it would be a battery confection shoehorned into a combustion platform as part of a body shell identical to existing petrol and diesel models. Yet that's just what's happened. Resources which should have gone into developing the kind of bespoke mid-sized model EV platform that many rivals can now offer, that's now due in a few years' time, were spent instead on the creation of more sophisticated fifth generation EV drivetrain technology and on the establishment of a purpose-designed manufacturing base in China, the first global BMW product from which is this iX3. Only time will tell whether that represents a wise strategy from this Bavarian maker. There's certainly no doubt that this car's eventual successor, which can't be all that far away, will be a far more complete product. Yet what this test has told us is that even as it is, the iX3 has a lot to recommend it. BMW wants you to compare it to a Mercedes EQC or an Audi e-tron, and if you do, you'll find it better value, more efficient and far better to drive. It also shades most of its rivals when it comes to cabin quality and in offering a more flexible back seat arrangement which reclines and conveniently folds in 3 sections. The brake energy regeneration system is very sophisticated too. We are disappointed that you can't have the all-wheel drive system that you'll find on the rival models that BMW's pitching this car against, and you might, like us, find it difficult to ignore the fact that there's a whole crowd of only slightly smaller, desirable, mid-sized EV models available for £10,000 to £15,000 less. But we're prepared to forgive this car much because the company has somehow managed to make it drive just as a BMW should. Expect many more Chinese-made models from this brand in the coming years, but few will be more significant than this one.